The desert doesn't lie. It stretches for miles, burnt sienna and bone-dry dust under a sun so fierce it seems to sear the soul. The wind doesn't sing here. It scrapes. It whispers things men don't want to hear. And on that morning, under the yawning blue of a merciless sky, Jack Callahan sat still on a wooden chair outside a rotting barn, with nothing but the stump of a cigar clenched in his teeth, and no arms to light it. He had once been a legend. In the town of Bitter Creek, they used to say that Jack could outdraw the devil himself. He wasn't the fastest, they'd whisper, he was the bullet. Guns were his religion. The clang of spurs, the smell of black powder, the righteous finality of a trigger that was his cathedral. But legends fall hard, and when they fall, they don't always get back up. His arms had been ripped from him not by war, not by justice, but by betrayal. A man he once called brother, one he bled beside, one who couldn't stand the shadow Jack cast over his own name. The ambush was clean, quick. One moment, he was riding through Black Vulture Pass with coin and confidence, and the next, nothing. He woke to silence, pain, and the horror of absence. But here's the thing about men like Jack Callahan. They don't stay buried. Even if the world says they're done, even if they can't hold a gun or ride a horse the way they used to, something remains. A fire, a whisper of purpose, a pulse that refuses to fade. Jack hadn't left Bitter Creek after the incident. He stayed, watched people turn their eyes when he passed, watched boys point and men pity. But he also listened, and one morning, he heard a name, Denton Price. That was the man who had betrayed him, now leading a small army through the southern territories, taking over ranches, imposing tax on towns, and worse, recruiting young boys too poor to say no and too desperate to ask why. He wasn't just a traitor. He was becoming something darker, something Jack had sworn to fight his whole life, a tyrant wearing a friendly smile. But what could a cowboy with no arms do against a man like that? That's what they all asked. That's what he asked until something changed. It started with a sound, the faint clink of metal behind the barn. Jack turned his head, teeth still gnashing that cigar, and squinted. A boy maybe 12 was struggling to pull something from the ground. A trap, rusted and bloody from rabbits, maybe worse. Jack yelled with what voice he had, and the boy froze. "Don't move." The kid looked up, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Why?" the boy asked. "Because if you lift that the wrong way, it'll take your hand." And in that moment, Jack remembered. Not the pain, not the guns, the knowing. He still had that. Jack spent the next weeks doing what no one expected, teaching. Not with hands, but with words, with eyes, with truth. The boy Caleb came back, brought others, sons of farmers, orphans of drifters. Jack showed them how to set traps, how to read tracks, how to survive. And when the time came, he showed them what it meant to stand for something. But word travels fast in the West, and Denton Price heard it too. That the man he'd left for dead wasn't just breathing, he was building something. A movement, a message. That strength wasn't in the draw, it was in the will. One night, as the wind howled like a wounded wolf and the moon cut silver lines through the open plains, a letter arrived at Jack's door. No stamp, no sender, just 6 words written in blood and whiskey. "You should have stayed buried, Jack." He stared at it, didn't blink, didn't flinch, just clenched his teeth tighter. And in the firelight that danced across the wooden walls of his cabin, something ignited, not revenge, not hate, conviction. Because this wasn't just about what was taken from him anymore. This was about what he still had to give. The past had taken his arms, but it hadn't taken his soul. And in the West, sometimes that's all a man needs. Because in the end, you don't become a legend by surviving. You become one by fighting anyway. There's a silence that doesn't come from the world around you, it comes from within. And in the stillness of midnight, with only the creak of the windmill and the low hum of desert insects outside, Jack Callahan sat by the fire, staring at the place where his hands used to be. He could feel them sometimes, phantom limbs, the doctor called it. But they weren't just in his mind, they were in his memories. Fingers that once gripped revolvers with divine precision, now reduced to nothing but air and ache. The embers crackled in the fireplace, throwing faint light onto his weather-worn face. Shadows danced across his cheeks like ghosts, and maybe that's what they were. Ghosts of the man he used to be. He hadn't cried when they took his arms. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't begged. But now, months later, sitting alone with only the weight of what he'd lost, the tears finally came. Silent, hot, like shame. He had told the boys Caleb, Elijah, the others that strength came from within. That courage wasn't about holding a weapon, but holding a purpose. But what if he'd been lying? Not to them, to himself. Jack looked over at the journal on the shelf, leather-bound, battered. It had belonged to his father, a preacher who died with his boots on and his Bible open. God shapes men in fire. the old man had written. But sometimes he lets them burn to see what survives. Jack had hated that line. Even now, it made him clench his jaw, because he didn't feel shaped. He felt broken. 10 years earlier, Jack, in his prime, rides into Silver Gulch with sunlight on his back and fire in his blood. A legend, a shadow, a storm. He walks into the saloon and sees Denton Price for the first time. Young, eager, too eager. "Let me ride with you, Jack," the boy had said. "Let me learn," and Jack, blind with pride, had said yes. He taught Denton everything. How to track, how to shoot, how to lead, and when the time came to name a second in command, Jack didn't even think twice. He should have, because betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who sit beside you at the fire. The door creaked open. It was Caleb holding a small, whittled piece of wood. "I made this for you," the boy said, shyly. It's a handle. For your knife. You could tie it to your stump, and maybe still cut stuff." Jack stared at the boy, at his innocence, his hope. That fragile piece of carved pine was more than a tool. It was belief. "Thank you," Jack muttered, voice hoarse. The boy nodded and stepped back outside into the night, unaware of the storm he had just calmed inside the man behind the scars. Later, Jack stood outside his cabin, the stars above him, cold and clear, the wind biting, but honest. He looked down at the dirt and whispered to no one, "I am not who I was. I can't ride like I did, can't draw, can't fight, so what's left of me?" The night didn't answer, but deep inside, past the self-pity, past the grief, something stirred. Not pride, not anger, but resolve. A man isn't measured by what he holds in his hands. He's measured by what he does with what remains. The next morning, news arrived. A rider came in fast and breathless. Denton Price's men had taken Red Hollow, burned the church, took 5 boys. Jack froze. He wanted to ride out, to act. But how? He couldn't draw a gun, couldn't fire, couldn't even grip reins alone. "Let the sheriff handle it," one of the townsfolk said. "You've done enough," said another. And for a moment, Jack believed them. He went inside, sat on the floor, head against the wall, and let despair in. But just as it threatened to root, he saw the carving. Caleb's gift. A handle. A reminder, not of power, but of possibility. He stood, slow, painfully. He stared at the empty holsters on the wall, at the maps, the journals, the letters, at the photo of his father, stern but kind, standing by the very same door. "If I don't fight, what do I leave behind? If I give up, what do they learn?" Jack breathed deep, and the fire came back. He tied the handle to his arm with leather cord. Then he walked outside, face like stone, heart like flame. To the boys, he said one sentence: "We ride at dawn, not with guns, not with fists, but with purpose, because even a man with no arms can still hold on to something." The sun bled orange across the hills as Jack Callahan rode again, not like before, not with the sharp gallop of a gunslinger, but steady, firm, surrounded by a dozen boys turned men by fire, not age. They didn't ride for glory. They rode for answers, because somewhere between the silence of his past and the violence rising across the west, a secret was stirring, and Jack had begun to suspect that his betrayal wasn't personal. It was part of something bigger. The sheriff's office reduced to ash. The chapel, once the tallest building in town, stood scorched, cross-charred to cinder. But what struck Jack hardest wasn't the ruins. It was the message, carved into the church doors with the blade: "He who holds the past holds the power." Denton Price wasn't just hunting towns. He was hunting something ancient. And that something seemed to begin with Jack's father. That night, back at the campfire, Jack pulled out a journal. It had been stored away since his father's funeral, never opened, not out of grief, but guilt. His father had been a preacher, yes, but also something more, a seeker, a historian of sorts. He claimed to trace the lineage of settlers, outlaws, tribes, and treasures hidden by war and whispered in saloons. Jack had never believed in that kind of legacy, until now. Flipping through pages yellowed by time, he stopped at drawing a sketch of an old Spanish cross etched into a canyon wall. Beside it, his father had written, "Only the forgotten know the path. Trust the broken." Jack stared at those words as wind rustled the flames. They meant nothing, and yet everything. 15 years earlier, Jack, younger, drunk, furious with his father. "You chase ghosts while people starve," he'd shouted. His father only nodded, touched his Bible, and said, "Sometimes the ghost is all that's left to save us." Jack had stormed out. He never spoke to him again. Now, in the present, that memory cut deeper than a blade. What if his father had been trying to warn him? What if Denton wasn't just taking land, but following a map? And Jack had the key without knowing it. The next day, Caleb and the boys explored the ruins of Red Hollow, Amidst blackened stone and broken pews, Caleb found a trapdoor in the church floor hidden beneath old rags and rubble. It creaked open into darkness. They lowered a lantern. Inside, stone steps carved into the earth, and at the bottom a vault, unopened, untouched, but branded with the same Spanish cross from the journal. Inside the vault, a rusted ceremonial dagger, a hand-drawn map of the canyon lands, and a letter addressed to Callahan, not Jack, but Ezekiel Callahan, his father. The letter, weathered and stained, read, "Zeke, if you're reading this, the blood has reached the door. The cross marks the fort, but only the heir can speak the name aloud. The Brotherhood will come. They always do. Guard the boy. He is the final key." Jack's breath caught. He read it again. Guard the boy. He had spent his whole life rejecting his father's beliefs, his obsession. But now every word felt true. And if Denton had discovered even half of this, he wasn't just waging war. He was trying to rewrite the story of the West. Cut to a distant outpost, stone mesa, dozens of tents. Inside the largest, Denton Price, now a self-styled general, sharp beard, black gloves, eyes hollow from the weight of ambition. Before him, a map spread across a table, marked in red with ancient symbols. A scout reports, Callahan's alive. He has the boy, and the journal. Denton doesn't flinch, just smiles coldly. Good, he'll bring me to it. A woman stands beside him. Not just any woman, Delilah Quinn, former outlaw turned mystic. She speaks in riddles, but her influence on Denton is clear. "The canyon's heart opens only with blood," she murmurs. Denton responds, "Then blood it shall have." The next few days blur. Dust, ride, smoke on the horizon. They follow the map. Each landmark matches. The cross etched in the stone. The canyon that weeps at night from wind. But something is wrong. They're being followed. Not by outlaws. By shadows. Quiet. Methodical. Watching. At camp, Jack stares at the fire. He sees the dagger, the map, the journal. And he whispers, "Why me?" He never asked to be a keeper of secrets. He only wanted to protect, to survive. But now he realizes he's not just part of the story. He's the final chapter. That night, the camp is ambushed. Not with bullets, with fire. Flaming arrows rain from the canyon walls. Chaos erupts. The boys scatter. Jack tries to direct them, but the panic is too great. Then he sees her, Delilah, standing atop the ridge, staring down at him like a ghost from prophecy. She raises her hand and speaks in an old tongue. The canyon trembles. A wall of stone shifts. A secret passage opens behind the cross engraved rock. And Jack realizes this was never about revenge. It was about unlocking the West's greatest secret. And he was the password. As the flames die, Jack limps into the canyon passage alone. He turns back once. The others are safe, for now. But he knows what lies ahead isn't for them. It's for him. And somewhere in the shadows, Denton is already inside waiting. The passage through the canyon narrowed until Jack Callahan was walking alone. The walls closing in like the ribcage of some ancient beast long buried beneath the sands. The torch tied to his shoulder flickered weakly, casting wavering shadows that danced like memories on stone. His breath echoed. So did his doubts. Behind him, the desert burned with the remnants of Denton's ambush. Ahead, nothing but the unknown. But perhaps that was fitting, because what Jack was about to face wasn't just hidden behind stone and mystery, it was buried within himself. He stopped at a fork in the path. 2 tunnels. No markings. No clues. He cursed under his breath, then, almost instinctively, pulled the old journal from his satchel. Flipping through it, his eyes landed on a passage he hadn't seen before. When you can no longer choose with your hands, you must listen with your soul. Jack exhaled slowly. Not just a metaphor, a riddle. He closed his eyes, listened. At first, only silence. Then, a faint hum. Not wind, not water. A resonance low, deep, vibrating from the left tunnel. He turned, a child again, sitting on the porch beside his father. "I don't want to be like you," Jack had said. His father didn't respond with anger, just looked at him and said, "That's fine, son. Be better." Those words echoed now not as judgment, but as permission. Jack moved into the left tunnel. Each step became heavier, not with fear, but with realization. He wasn't fighting to prove he could still be a man. He was walking to accept who he'd become. The path widened into a chamber carved by human hands long before the frontier was mapped. At the center stood a stone altar, and behind it, a mural faded but unmistakable. A cowboy, armless, surrounded by fire, facing a beast with many heads, and in the flames, a boy. Jack stepped closer. It wasn't just a mural, it was a prophecy. And somehow he was in it. Then a voice. "You made it further than I expected." He turned. From the shadows stepped Denton Price, dressed in black, revolvers at his sides untouched. "Fitting, ain't it?" Denton smirked. You come all this way just to watch history be rewritten. Again, Jack's jaw tightened. You think this is about power, Jack said, but it's always been about fear. Yours, Denton's face twitched. I'm building something eternal. No, Jack replied. You're running from what you couldn't become. Jack couldn't draw, but he didn't need to, because for the first time, he wasn't here to survive Denton. He was here to end the curse they both carried. Denton approached the altar, pulling from his coat a piece of obsidian flat, smooth, with a symbol carved into its face. It's the keystone, he said. The tribes, the priests, the settlers, they all knew. This place isn't just a cave. It's a vault. A gate to what? Jack asked. Denton smiled. To Dominion. He pressed the stone to the altar. The ground trembled. The mural lit up. A roar rose from beneath earthquake, thunder, or something worse. Jack felt it in his chest. But then, something strange. The mural shifted. The boy in the fire stepped forward, not toward Denton, toward Jack. The mural responded. To him, Denton stepped back, eyes wide. What is this? And Jack understood. He was never the gatekeeper of a power. He was the vessel of a memory. This wasn't about treasure. This was about restoring what was broken in the land, in the people, and in himself. Jack stepped toward the altar. I may not have hands, he said, but I still carry what mattered. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to the stone. The symbol lit up not red, but gold. The rumble ceased. The flames died down, and the passage behind them opened not into gold, but into light. Warm, soft, forgiving. Denton screamed, grabbed his gun. But before he could fire, Caleb's voice rang out. Drop it. The boy stood at the entrance, rifle shaking in his grip, but his eyes steady. Others followed. They had come. For Jack. For the truth. Denton, defeated not by force, but by legacy, fell to his knees. The next moments were quiet. The chamber faded. The light dimmed. And Jack smiled. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. Jack walked into town not as a legend, not as a warrior, but as a teacher. The town no longer saw the man without arms. They saw the man who carried the West's soul on his back. He stood before the townspeople one final time. No speech, just a single sentence. You don't need to hold a gun to hold the truth. That night, by the fire, Caleb asked, do you miss your old life? Jack looked into the flames. Every day, he said. But I don't need it to live. He turned to the boy, smiling. Sometimes what's taken from us reveals what we were meant to become. And in that moment, the Old West fell silent. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Jack Callahan had won, not with bullets, but with soul. The canyon trembled. From the deep crevices behind the stone gate, Denton Price's army surged like a storm. Dozens of mercenaries, faces hid behind bandanas, rifles loaded, boots pounding against sacred ground. The sun hung high and merciless in the sky, casting long shadows that moved with intent to kill. But Jack Callahan did not flinch. He stood at the edge of the altar chamber, no gun in hand. No steel to draw, only the fire in his chest and a message on his lips. This land remembers truth. You came here for power, but power belongs to those who bleed for peace. Denton scoffed as he emerged from the crowd, now covered in dust and rage. And what do you bleed for, Jack? Some old ghost, some forgotten prayer. Jack took one step forward, resolute. I bleed for the boy watching me. I bleed for the fire you tried to bury. And I bleed because I'm still alive, Denton. Even without arms, I'm more man than you'll ever be. Not by Jack. By Caleb. Hidden on the ridge above the canyon, the boy let out a single cry or whistle like a hawk. A signal. From behind the rocks, from the narrow goat paths carved into the walls, the boys of Bitter Creek emerged armed not with revolvers, but slings, traps, and tactics taught by a cowboy who had to fight with his soul. They didn't charge. They outsmarted. Smoke bombs filled the canyon. Mirrors reflected the sunlight into the enemy's eyes. Horses were startled. Paths collapsed under careful traps. Chaos. But through it all, Jack moved forward. Denton fought through his own men, snarling, searching. Callahan. And Jack found him face to face at the foot of the altar. For a moment, silent. Then Denton lunged, knife drawn. Fast as ever. Jack ducked, sidestepped, used his shoulder to slam Denton into the rock. He had learned to fight with everything but fists. He used elbows, knees, even his weight. Denton landed a hard blow with the hilt of the knife against Jack's ribs, cracking bone. But Jack didn't fall. Jack's mind flashed his father's words. The boys he taught. The map. The mural. Be better. This is not about vengeance. It's about ending what should have never begun with a roar. Jack used his momentum, slamming his shoulder into Denton again, knocking the knife free. They crashed into the altar together. Denton clawed for the keystone. Jack kicked it away. You don't get to rewrite history. Denton, Jack growled. I am history. Denton shouted. No, Jack said. You're its mistake. Caleb appeared, gun in hand. Denton reached for his own revolver. One shot fired, but not from Caleb, from Delilah. The mystic woman, standing on the edge of the chamber, had aimed at Denton, her eyes filled not with vengeance, but sorrow. The bullet struck Denton in the leg. He collapsed. She dropped her weapon. You were supposed to bring balance, she whispered, broken. Not blood. Jack walked to Denton, who now writhed in pain, no longer a threat, only a man exposed. He looked down at his former brother, once a rider, now a ruin. You taught me something, Denton, Jack said. Oh yeah. Denton spat blood. What? That a man without arms can still carry the weight of a better world, not to fear, but to awe. They saw boys leading like men. They saw the canyon spared. They saw a cowboy without guns, without fists. When the altar chamber had been sealed, the keystone returned to its resting place. The canyon would remain protected not as a weapon, but as a memory. The boys were safe. Caleb stood by Jack's side, smiling. We won, the boy said. No, Jack replied, hand on his shoulder. You did. The town had changed. People no longer looked at Jack with pity. They looked with respect. Children played with sticks, pretending to be cowboys like him, not with guns, but with strategy. The sheriff offered him a badge. Jack refused. I don't need a title, just a place to teach. That night, by the fire, Caleb sat beside Jack. Do you ever miss your arms? He asked softly. Jack stared at the flames. Every morning, he said. But I've learned something. Caleb leaned in. What? Jack smiled. You don't need arms to lift others. You just need heart. The journal, once belonging to his father, now rested in Caleb's hands. Jack had passed it on. He walked into the horizon, no longer escaping anything, but becoming part of the land. The Old West had a new legend, not written in blood, but in courage. And in that moment, the Old West fell silent, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Jack Callahan had won, not with bullets, but with soul. The fire had burned down to embers. The stars above Bitter Creek shimmered like old stories waiting to be told again. And in the quiet, under the weight of the endless sky, Jack Callahan sat alone, not as a broken man, not as a legend, but as something new. He had walked through fire without fists to clench, faced betrayal with no blade to draw, and emerged from a war not with victory in his hands, but with peace in his heart. Once, he believed that being a man meant being strong, fast, fearless. That to lead, you needed steel at your side. That to matter, you had to make noise. But the desert taught him otherwise. Out there among silence, ghosts, and dust, he discovered that strength lives in stillness, in the quiet choices no one sees, in the courage to keep walking, even when everything is lost. Jack had entered that canyon carrying weight, his father's voice, his own pride, the shame of weakness. He emerged from it not lighter, but clearer. He didn't need arms to teach, didn't need a gun to protect, didn't need revenge to find closure. What he needed was truth, and truth, he learned, doesn't shout. It whispers patiently, waiting for us to stop running long enough to hear it. Standing on the edge of Bitter Creek one final time, Jack watched the boys he had trained ride across the prairie, laughing, planning, believing. He smiled not for them, because of them. The future no longer scared him, because now it wasn't his burden to carry. It was his gift to pass on. You don't need hands to hold a legacy, he whispered. You just need the will to leave something that matters behind. You may never find yourself in a canyon with a knife at your throat, but life will take things from you. A dream, a relationship, your strength, your time. And when it is you will have to decide, is what I lost greater than what I still carry inside? That's what Jack Callahan discovered. Not through bloodshed, but through surrender. Not in violence, but in vulnerability. He faced the thing that scared him most, his own emptiness. And in doing so, he found what none of his victories had ever given him: peace, clarity, purpose. You may feel broken, unworthy. You may believe that the world only values the loud, the armed, the perfect. But remember Jack's journey. He had nothing left to offer, and still became the man who changed everything. So maybe, just maybe, the part of you that feels most unworthy is the very part where your power is waiting to awaken. Don't wait to feel whole to start walking. Don't wait to be ready to face the canyon. Don't wait to have everything to give something. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are not won with hands but with soul. And in that moment, the Old West fell silent, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Jack Callahan had won, not with bullets, but with soul. Comment below, which part of this story touched your heart the most? Share this video. Send it to someone who needs a reminder of their inner strength.
Subscribe now for more stories of resilience, courage, and transformation delivered straight to your soul. Welcome to Secrets of the West, where legends aren't born, they're forged, one quiet decision at a time.